It's time for us to begin this evening. If we'll go ahead and open your Bibles to the text of James. We finished up Galatians last week, and so we're starting James today as we continue our planned study from most of last quarter and into this quarter of the law, Galatians, and the gospel, James, and the gospel, James. They're very similar to books in some ways. They've got some intersections and ideas and concepts that are really good, but they also have their unique and special message. And so with that, we'll be in the text here in just a second. Before we get any further, though, let's go ahead and bow together in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time we share together in spiritual things. We thank you for your word. Its value to us. We hope as disciples and followers of Jesus that not only we become careful students, but we become generous in our application of grace and service. Help us to know your word and then live in a way that matches our understanding and your expectation for us. Please watch over our souls, and we offer this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. So as noted, we're in James, and James, as the text kind of opens up, moves very quickly from theological, informational, structure-based issues that were really common in Galatians to very practical advice. In some ways, I read one author referred to James as, in part, as like Proverbs, if you will, for the New Testament, because of the level of applicable wisdom that's in it. There's a lot of concepts and ideas that are instantly applied, sometimes not always easily applied, but instantly you can say, yeah, that's something I need to do right now. That's super important because not all the Bible distills that way. There are sections of what God has revealed that require of us to sit down, chew on it for a long time, and digest to get the full sense of it. Some things are very heavy. Some things become complicated because life or our lack of maturity or understanding. And that's for all of us at all points in life. We are constantly maturing and growing. We can reach a level of good insight, but then we learn nuances and details, and the world has a kaleidoscope shift around us all the time, trying to distract us or make things that should be simple seem complicated. And so all of that goes on, making it difficult to process parts. James, on the other hand, really doesn't live that way. The text of James is very direct, very applicable quickly, like I mentioned already, but also one that, when practiced, has a practical change in your day-to-day life. And it has a little heaviness to it. In James chapter 1, verse 2, it reads, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." First level of thinking about that, I'm not quite sure in my development as a Christian there was ever a point where I looked at the passage and said, I totally get why it is that I should count everything as joy when I'm suffering, as it says in this term here, various kinds of trials. Like, oh, it's so difficult. That makes me feel so good about things. I like it when it's more difficult for me. I think I probably leave on the other side of the table most of the time. We're like, could you simplify that for me or make it less complicated? Is there a refined version that just has the key points? And yet James says, consider it joy. Maturity tells me on the back end, especially post-trial, why I needed that. But leading into it, I don't like it. I don't really want it that way. And so this is a message for me, that I have to look at things differently than how I would want to. And I'm sure that probably applies for a lot of us. Because he's teaching us, again, that these challenges build perseverance, they build character, and they show how belief in Jesus can change how we feel about that. It will change perspective and point of view. So, first question to think about before I kind of look at the book as a big picture, talk about its authorship, writer, purpose, genre, all that academic stuff, is to think about this. How does your faith, our faith, shape your everyday choices? And the second thing to think about is, how has God used challenges in your life to refine you? We get back a little bit further. What does it look for a Christian to be refined? Or even one more step process. What is refining? We'll keep backing up until we get to the simplest form of it. So what does it mean to be refined? Generally, not even biblically. Purified. Cleansed. How do you refine a metal? Metallurgically, how do we get the impurities out of it? Heat it up. And what happens in that process to the stuff that isn't the stuff? It gets burned off, right? If we were to do like recycle some metal or something, we got a bunch of railway spikes, and we're going to get the furnace hot enough to bring it back to a semi-molten or a molten status. A lot of heat, a lot of stuff. Carbon, other chemicals, depending on different materials are going to burn off, depending on what metal we're working with to begin with, but that heat goes up. That's generally unpleasant, right? You ever been near a working furnace? How much hair did you have afterwards? Not as much as you started with, because stuff's smoking out there. You get chaff comes off. If it's a true hand-forged furnace, they're bellowing it the whole time. All that work. So refining, in the concept of how the word is used, has that image underneath it. So that, if we stretch it, so the Christian's refining process. How do we burn off the impurities in our life? And what does that process look like? Do we just wake up one day and we know? It's like all of a sudden, oh, I understand.
Or burn them off too slowly.
Burn them off too slowly, probably. We probably have some of that. What would then be one of the impurities we're talking about? What kind of things are being refined out of us? Sin broadly. Specifically, all the things that are works of the flesh that are described in Galatians would be part of that. How we see things in context, how our perception. Personalized, that looks unpleasant. I don't like that. I don't want to do that. James says, count it all joy when you experience that. Part of the refining process is changing the way we think about even that. But I'm excited. I'm joyously approaching this moment of refining where I get to be better. How many of you had a period in life or are currently gym goers where you work out? I'm currently working out. I've done that off and on. A few of us as well. There's a post-workout thing, especially if you haven't been working out for a little bit and you push yourself a little extra hard, where there's this delayed onset muscle soreness. So like you're fine the day after, but the next day, your muscles are like, what'd you do? And why did you do it? You haven't done that with me before. And it makes you not want to go back to the gym, intellectually, emotionally. But you actually should go back to the gym because it'll actually accelerate your recovery and you really won't feel that way a second time. It's just a one-time thing. That's a refining process where your body's better off through that little edge. I think some of that is what's the concept here for James's letter, is that we are going to be better off if we approach those trials with a mindset that this is good, that this is a joyful thing. Is it hard to be joyful about things that are challenging like that? Especially when it reveals parts of our character that maybe we don't like. And maybe it's going to be difficult. Like, if you got a short temper and then your refining experience is stressful, 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 and you realize, yeah, I really do have a short temper, and you go, more stressful, more stressful, more stressful. This is what actually causes my temper to flare up, and I've got to change that about myself so that it doesn't go stressful, explode, stressful, explode. That's part of what's underneath this. So when we step back and we think about the letter itself, that might help us too. The letter begins, and it's just James, a servant of God, of the Lord Jesus Christ. Very plain opener. He doesn't have a masthead that tells you which of the various James it could be. We have options. Early historical tradition strongly associates this letter with James, the brother of Jesus, not James, the son of Zebedee, nor James, the son of Alphaeus. So history says this is James, the brother of Jesus. That's because the son of Zebedee was executed by Herod Agrippa I around AD 42. That's too early. While James, the son of Alphaeus, fades from the record altogether after the apostles' listing. He's never really identified. However, James, the Lord's brother, emerged in the Jerusalem church as a central figure, and he is mentioned in Galatians chapter 1, Galatians chapter 2, Acts chapter 15. Paul even calls him a pillar among the apostles. Extra biblical sources, such as Josephus, Hegesippus, describe him as a respected and devout figure known for prayer and wisdom. So his history seems to match those connections. This James didn't initially believe that Jesus was whom he declared himself to be, John 7:5. But after the resurrection, Jesus appeared to him personally in 1 Corinthians 15:7. And so that's kind of gives us some perspective there. It's also super interesting when you think about their childhood context and opportunities, if you want to think about it. But note this, that is history. That is tradition. That is a strong evidence-based assumption. I can say for certainty that James wrote this. I can say that my opinion is that this is strongly the case that it's going to be James, the brother of Jesus, is the best option. But no, it doesn't explicitly say that. And that's part of the process of reading through these things, is realizing I can get this far and make this assertion, but I can't make it conclusively because there's not enough conclusive evidence. But there's enough for me to go, that seems to match. And so that would be my read of that. That probably also has that tone edge too of someone who has some more life experience, a little older, they've been through some things themselves, and so kind of fit the age bracket for the author on the side as well. It also is written to the 12 tribes of the dispersion. So that would give our audience clues that these are predominantly Jewish disciples. Again, tying to Jerusalem as the context for their beginning point for this big spread. And it's going to tell us a little bit about what they need to hear, how the message is given it. So you can kind of see that this is 12 tribes dispersed, Jews spread everywhere, who are about to go through trials. What kind of trials will they go through? They'll get more narrow in like what they're going to experience. Are they going to be having moments where they're arguing with the cashier about whether or not the cashier gave them enough change? Is that their context of a trial? What do we know about the Christians who were dispersed? What kind of world were they moving into outside of Jerusalem? Do they have safety nets of great family units to protect them? Not really. Like, they might have had some, because there are Jews everywhere in the Roman and Mesopotamian zone. Any other kinds of history that tell us how Rome was treating Jews and Christians post AD 70? How about they're going to be slaughtered for their convictions? You get some of the individuals mentioned in the New Testament text who are then mentioned in the histories of Rome for having maintained their faith all the way to the point of their death. They're unwilling to renounce Christ, even to the point of death to the sword. They are separated from family members. They are despised. They are rejected. They are hated. Nobody wants them around. They become the scapegoat for all problems for Rome for a good 100 years. And really, in the Roman world, all the way until 312 AD CE, Christians are not in power whatsoever. It's the conversion of Constantine to really flip that table. And followers of Jesus very quickly go from despised to highly empowered. So around 398 or so, the whole world had changed for them. But these Christians who are receiving the letter of James, they are going to be going through a ringer that's hard for us to conceptualize. You and I have had interactions with Christians, maybe through emails or maybe in person, who have been through a rough thing because of their faith. They may have been fired. They may have been yelled at. You yourself may have had difficulty with family members or friends or neighbors because of your convictions. I know some Christians who have served jail time in the Philippines because of their preaching or because of how people responded to their preaching. I know some who were converted in jail and preached before they were released. But for the most part, those are short periods of time in their lives. This is going to be everybody throughout the entire Roman Empire, but especially those who are Jewish. Because, in addition to their faith being a problem, their ethnic and historic religion was a problem for the Romans as well. The Roman emperor and the whole Roman government system is tired of rebellions in Palestine. So that whole area is getting the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. That is accomplished by a whole bunch of size 12s marching down and squishing everything that's rebellious to the ground. Every inch of it. Just crush them. They gradually absorb all the fortresses that were Herod's encampments throughout Palestine. They destroy all of Jerusalem. They destroy and sack the temple. They break the stones. They enslave all the Jews living in Jerusalem, and they put them to work. One of their last jobs for the inhabitants of Jerusalem is to build a siege ramp up to one of the remaining fortresses on the edge of the Dead Sea known as Masada. They build that big fortress ramp, and up on the top, there were the remaining rebel Jews that were trying to fight against Roman oppression. And so they used the inhabitants of Jerusalem to build the siege ramp so they wouldn't kill their own people. And so they build their siege ramp, and the Roman legions march up the ramp to find the entire fortress full of almost everybody dead. And either killed each other, poisoned each other, or died of starvation. Josephus' comments in his history is kind of vague, but the fact was they're all dead. And if you go to Israel, you can walk up the siege ramp if you so chose, or you could take the tram up as well. It's a lot easier to take the little tram up to the top and see that last little bit. But that's their world. Everything they know is going to be gone. And the Christians were told to get out. And so they were already warned to leave the area for all the things that were about to happen. As mentioned already, just on the stylistic side, James is written more in line with what we call the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. So it's more like Ecclesiastes, it's more like Psalms, it's more like Proverbs, it's more like Song of Songs. It doesn't deal with heavy theological arguments as much as other letters do, and it tries to really go to practical, gospel-based application. In some ways, we'll be able to see this when we look at its breakout, in that it is touching on a whole lot of the content of the Sermon on the Mount. And so if you want to read something as a parallel reading as we're going through James, you can put Matthew 5, 6, and 7 on repeat. And you're going to see how these circles loop back and forth where some of these same ideas represent themselves. Our goal tonight is to cover overview of these 5 chapters real quickly, have some questions for each of them, and then we'll dig into a deeper look of things next Wednesday, or the Wednesday after our singing night, where we're looking at James 1 through 18 in more detail. So let's take a look at chapter 1 first. We won't read all of it, but we will certainly pay attention to the entirety of the text. And the wisdom that's being identified here is found as an outgrowth of what genuine faith is like. Someone who truly believes, a true believer. There's a true believer, for sure, in our attendance this evening. Matt, what's the best college football team on the planet? You can go ahead and say it. We all know what the answer is, correct? They live up north of us and they wear orange, right? Does it matter if they're ranked number 1 or ranked number 25 or somebody else is ranked? He's a true believer. Every year, he's willing to suffer under the idea that this year will be the year. As is every other single football team's fan base. And for the most part, it varies. Every now and then you have a legacy thing where they happen a few years in a row, but for the most part, you don't know. You don't know until the end of the season if your hopes match that. True believers, though, day 1 to day end of season, whenever that stretches into January or whatever, this is the year. Oh, that was a rebuilding year. Next year's the year. Oh, okay. All right. True faith, genuine faith for the disciples endures difficulties at a rate that is, by earthly standards, irrational. It's not reasoned out. Why would you do that? Why would you suffer when you could just back off just a little bit? Just soften the edge some, and then you won't have to endure with the problems and difficulties. The classic old illustration I used to hear was when Paul is dealing with the folks who fashion idols, the silversmith, the coppersmiths. Why didn't Paul go to them and say, hey, look, you don't have to worry about it. Don't worry about it. All you need to do is stop making these idols, and if you start making gold crosses, you're golden. Just make a bunch of those. My people will buy them, and the problem goes away. Would that have eliminated the pressure that they were putting on him because of the money they were losing? Yeah. Is that Paul's behavior? Does he do that? Is that his solution to the problem? But does it sound like it's wise? Well, if you just shift a little bit, then everything's fine. James's wisdom is, look, when you suffer, count it joy. Our wisdom is, hey, just make something else that they'll want to buy, and your world's okay. Make it adjacent or next to what they already have, and just accommodate everything. My little take-home question for you for this section is to think, and if you want to share this one, you can, but no one's on the press spot to do this, is to think about how you personally matured through a spiritual trial. Because there's two different categories. I can quickly raise my hand and admit that my stupidity has made me smarter. Because you do a dumb thing, and you learn not to do the dumb thing again, right? We can all admit that. It's a little harder for us to admit that we did dumb things that are in spiritual contexts, because that has to publicly admit that we've sinned. And for whatever reason, Christians, especially mature Christians, don't want to admit what the Bible calls fact. How many people sin and fall short of the glory of God? 100% of us, right? But are we uncomfortable admitting publicly that we are sinners and that we have sinned? And maybe we sinned like in the last 5 days? Well, I don't want to admit that. I'm uncomfortable with that. Mathematically, that's an irrational feeling, right? But we feel that way. We feel uncomfortable with the idea of dealing with our weaknesses. But think deeply about how your own spiritual trial, where your faith was tested, it had to mature some, you had to grow, you had to be refined. Maybe you had the pressure cushion of someone coming to you and saying, look, my friend, what you're doing right now is wrong. It's not wrong because it's folly, maybe it is, but it's wrong because it goes against what God teaches over here. Does that cause your sweaters to kind of like get sweaty and you get your hair kind of gets on the back of your neck and you get uncomfortable? Well, yeah, it does for me too. But that's how you can think through and recognize, hey, wait a minute, I've been there. And then we go one more step to where the world pushed on your faith hard and you didn't give in. Because the first one is the refining of maturing. The second one is you're demonstrating to yourself that you have enough faith to be pressured and not go along with the crowd, which is the next level of growth. You may not be consistently doing it all the time. And as a preacher, I come pre-equipped with like a little defense shield, because people instantly change their behavior when they find out what I do for a living. Like it's uncannily magic. The preacher walks into the room and everyone stops talking about whatever they were talking about. They were joking and cutting up, and clearly we can't talk that way in front of the preacher. So that means my experiences are going to be different than yours when my faith was tested in different ways. But they're all in that same space, and it's a great way to kind of reflect on what's going on there. The other big phrase that's super familiar comes from James 1:22 in the chapter. And to think about what it means to be a doer versus a hearer of God's word in light of a 21st century Christian's experience. So we don't have to flee, we're not fleeing Jerusalem. We're much more like the exiles in Babylon who are trying to do good to the nation around us. But what's James getting at when he says be a doer and not a hearer? Yeah, that causes us to say, well, what I got to be doing is, we'll scale this. If somebody writes a really good article on the internet or even just shares a Bible verse, is hitting the share button a doer? Carefully answer the question. Absolutely. Is there risk involved? Absolutely there's risk involved. Is there a lot of risk? Maybe not. It's social media. My rule about that is follow me, don't follow me, unfollow someone, block someone. It's not real. It's a little bit of like just artificial. So you can do all that stuff to a certain degree, and it's not the same as my next door neighbor. But that also means that my next door neighbor's needs spiritually and my need to interact with them has to go above the like, comment, and share interaction level. Or maybe I go over and check on them. Hey, how you doing? Is everything all right? Or maybe I go, hey, you want to come to church? You want to sit down and have a Bible study? Hey, I'm praying for you. And they might come back with, I'm praying for you too. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. That's a next level. Each of those are incremental steps of doing in one category. Next level of doing is not just loving your neighbor, loving your brethren. Might be in service, might be in expressing your faith clearly, might be changing your life. Spiritual change is hard. How many habits do we have? I lost track. I got a lot. The classic one for most of the guys I know, when we leave the house, we have a threefold thing. We got to check our pockets to make sure certain items are present. Pocket check. And then we usually go back in the house because we forgot something. Like that's the process. There's usually a couple trips there. But that's a habit. All these habits in there. Spiritually, some of our habits have to be broken because they're not in line with what God wants us to be doing, even though they sound or sounded like a great idea when we started. Or we need to build a good one. The text continues into James chapter 2, and he very practically and specifically condemns the practice of showing, big fancy word, partiality, smaller word, favoritism, but very specifically, courting favor with the rich and ignoring the poor. Did Jesus say something about the presence of impoverished people in his gospel? It's good news. Are there going to be a point in life where there's no poor people in our lives? They're always going to be there. And note this, can you determine if someone's poor by looking at them? No, but we act like we can. Favoritism here on one edge is giving an undue preference to those who are wealthy. Favoritism can go the other way too. It can go on false boundaries and false barriers and treat the people who act like they have money better than those who have true and faithful hearts independent of the amount of money they have. All those things are coming into play with this very binary look. That leads into a pretty powerful statement later. The Church of Corinth struggled with this. Pretty blunt context there. So much so that their Lord's Supper was perverted. And it was perverted in such a way that we look at one part of it and we talk about the meals that were taking place, but don't forget the biggest part of that condemnation was the shame being applied to those who didn't have enough. There's some other edges of it that are super important too, but in context, those who had money and prestige, they're getting all the attention, lavished all the energy on them, as if that made them superior disciples. Wealthy or poor does not establish a standard of a person's faithfulness. And the powerful thing for all of us is to know it's always relative. Because it's your community establishes that reality. And cost of living is more localized on a practical level for sure, and some of that too. But that leads to a notable phrase. Verse 17, faith without works is what? Pretty plain, right? I believe. Okay, what's the evidence of it? Where's the work? Is James saying that we actually earn our salvation? Is that what he's talking about? But do people struggle with the application of the idea? Yeah, and to a certain point we all do. Because we're asking the question, what does he mean? Part of what he means is that a faith that's just sitting there isn't an active faith. It's not a saving faith. There are 22 different iterations in the New Testament where something saves you. Baptism now saves you. The blood of Christ saves you. Your faith saves you. This is part of the other end of the table of things that don't save you. Dead faith won't save. And so it has to be a living faith. And in context, that's an active faith. So for the first century, this favoritism was based on finances. And we're thinking about James in the 21st century. We all know finances can still be a thing in churches, but are there other areas we should be developing our sense of discernment to make sure we're not doing the same thing? What other areas could churches sometimes end up in this favoritism category?
We could have favorite preachers or favorite song leaders or favorite cooks in our group.
Yeah. You think about how you feel when someone invites you to their house. Will I go? Do I not go? Why won't I go? Sometimes there's real legitimate concerns. Some of us have heavy allergies, mold issues, stuff that's like, this is a legit thing, and you got to work it out. But sometimes it's, 2 years ago, at a Bible class, they said this. I'm just making the illustration up, so I don't know what they said, but they said something. And I was just so bothered by it. I can't believe that they would say that. I'm not going to their house. You ever see that happen? You ever feel that occur around you? Same person will go, oh, I'm always going to their house, this other person's house. Because like Michael pointed out, they can cook. And I may not like the Bible class, but I'm going to get a good meal every time. Self-evaluation and self-reflection challenges us to think about that and go, where am I at with this? How do I feel about this? I've got to make sure that I'm self-aware enough to know that there's more challenges than just the explicit ones in context. This is the next section. James chapter 3 includes a portion of the text that is incredibly easy to say. It's even incredibly easy to understand, but admittedly inside the text, it's incredibly hard to do. How many of you have struggled with what you say? I'm putting up 3 limbs here so that I'm balanced. And it tells us that all of us are going to struggle with it. How many of you on the other end of it have been offended that someone you love said something that was untrue or unkind or hurtful? I'll put my 3 limbs back up again. There's an imbalance. There's a sense of false attribution in that case. I thought about it and wrote about it earlier this week, and I'll re-express it here. When you are cut off on the road, how do you immediately feel about the person driving who cut you off?
They're not very smart.
Who taught them how to drive? Why do they have a license? They must be the worst driver ever. How could they cut me off? We attribute all these things to them. But what happens when you cut somebody off?
That's kind of important.
I'm having a rough day. I'm a little distracted. How could they drive in my blind spot for so long? Don't they know I'm up in front of them? Shouldn't they be smart enough to keep 2 spaces between me and them? The fallacy of a false attribution is when we try to dictate to somebody else how they feel and why they did what they did. How many times are we wrong about that? All the times. Even when that person comes and tells us how they felt and why they did it, we're most likely not fully appreciating everything they said because we're still upset. So the illustration of the car experience moves into what James is trying to teach us in regards to how to tame the tongue, because it's such a powerful part of whom we are. Think back to Genesis 1. What's the mechanism that the Bible used to describe The thing that makes us different from everything else on the planet. All the other created things, they didn't get this last step from God. God did what when he did something to us? He breathed life into us. It's the same word that's later used to describe the process of inspiration. That God's breath comes out. That God speaks through this mechanism. That God teaches through this mechanism. The single unifying factor of humanity all the way up to the Tower of Babel is everyone spoke the same language. And the way to create chaos is scramble the languages. Make it so you can't understand one another. The tongue, our speech, is so dangerous that we got to bridle it. We got to make sure we keep our filter actually functioning. They used to really push, and you could get a couple of boxes you could put on your TV or your VCRs and DVD players that would filter out. ClearPlay was one of the companies, and they would cut bad language out. And now you have VidAngel for streaming, and you can kind of trim some of those things out. You have an off button, which is really powerful, just off. That functions. But the metaphor I think is really good, is similar to what Jesus says and Paul writes, that our speech needs to be seasoned with what? Salt will filter our speech. It will make it, Pauline, full of grace, if we sift it through some salt, if we season it properly. There's never going to be a point in your life where you have earned the right to say whatever you think. Because most of the time, half the stuff we're thinking probably should be filtered out, not said, and maybe we should refine it out of our personality because it doesn't need to be said. But we struggle with a push that says, ha, you can say whatever you want now. Les is out of town, so my brain just put that piece together. We got like a minute before I'll give them the late second bell. So we can kind of catch the other two things. The last two sections of the text talk about humility and submission to God, recognizing that pride is almost always the cause of conflict. Pride in yourself, pride in your opinion, pride in your understanding, and they create a false sense of security. True faith, that genuine, real faith, humbly depends on what God offers and trusts. Finally, James closes with a message of patience, integrity, and prayer, trying to kind of capstone the practicality of a committed life that says, I'm going to wait on the Lord. As the Lord wills, until the Lord comes. That's really kind of the last thrust of the message. And so from the next series of lessons all the way through the end of the calendar year, we're going to break down James 1 through 5. And then towards the end of the calendar year, we're going to do a little bit of a bounce back and forth discussion, maybe even pull some folks from the class to do a panel discussion so we can ask some questions and work through Galatians and James together toward the end of the year. But that's it for this evening. Appreciate your participation. And then next Wednesday night will be our singing night. And so we'll be back in James 1 the first Wednesday of next month.